Australian Supercars, the cream of the crop in the land down under for racing. Some of the most difficult to handle race cars in the world, with one of the best TV presentations. Supercars is an absolute blast to watch. Competition is fierce, and tracks are varied and exciting, coming in different flavors of straight circuits and standard road courses. We'll discuss the history of the Supercars Championship and the current teams and schedule for the 2024 season, as the first race of the year at Bathurst is coming up. Supercars' history can be summed up in one phrase: lots of split timelines. Production and touring cars can often be flip flopped during the early years, and it's hard to keep track of where it went. Formally, Appendix J is where the start of supercars is considered, at the Australian Touring Car Championship also being formed around the same time in 1960. A race at the long defunct New Blast circuit marked the start of the series, with David McKay and his Jaguar 3.4 liter taking home the victory. One unique feature about early supercars is that there was just one race for the entire season until 1969, initially at New Blast, moving to Lowood Airport in 1961, Longford Circuit in 1962, Malala Circuit in 1963, Lakeside Raceway in 1964, Sandown in 1965, Mount Panorama in 1966, Lakeside again in 1967, and Warwick Farm in 1968. 1969 would be the start of the five-race calendar, with Calder Raceway, Mount Panorama, Malala Circuit, Surfers Paradise, and Simmons Plains being the tracks on the calendar. 1965 was the start of the Group C regulations being allowed in supercars, alongside Group E, something that would stick around until 1973, where the previous year, Group E went away and a new Group C in its place. This Group C would run the long endurance races of Australia, which included Sandown, the Phillip Island 500, and the at the time Bathurst 500 miles, soon to be changed to the Bathurst 1000 kilometers. Both the Australian Touring Car Championship and the Australian Manufacturers Championship would be under Group C regulations. The interesting thing to note is that the Touring Car Championship would be 8 rounds from March to July, and the Manufacturers Championship would be 5 rounds from August to November, where it would stay until 1976 and incorporate the endurance races, except for the Bathurst 1000, which would stay as a non-championship round. 1978 saw the enduro races go behind the Australian Championship of Makes until 1980, where it got renamed to the Endurance Championship, with the original non-enduro rounds remaining a part of the Touring Car Championship. 1985 was a change from Group C regulations to Group A regulations, where it would remain through name changes such as going on to be 3A, and complying up until 1997, where Supercars' term officially came to be. By this point, supercars had only two makes of significant history in the sport left: Holden and Ford, a rivalry that persists to this day with only a slight modification since then. By 1999, Supercars was officially the V8 Championship, with a new sub-championship, the V8 Light Series, or what is now known as Super 2 and Super 3. The series was now subject to the new regulations, with them being V8 supercars, or 5.0-liter touring cars. These regulations were often controversial, with Ford and Holden dueling it out to trim off the front and rear spoilers to gain as much time as possible. And a new regulation called Project Blueprint was made so the series would become more spec in the early 2000s, having similarities between the Fords and the Holdens. Now, both Ford and Holden were fairly competitive between one another, something that would continue for years to come. During the 2000s, Supercars became more and more ambitious to take its series beyond Australia and New Zealand, as well as reach new markets within its own borders. 2005 saw it run Shanghai, the first non-oceanic round in its history, an attempted first of 5-year run before it got cut after the first run. 2006 was the first race at Bahrain. New tracks in Sydney, Hamilton, and Townsville highlighted the calendar for new street circuits in the late 2000s, and in 2010, the Yas Marina circuit was added in Abu Dhabi. At the same time that this was going on, a new car was being developed for the future. Driver at the time Mark Scafie wanted to cut costs and introduce newer, up-to-date parts and closer to modern-day sedans to attract new manufacturers. The cars became known as the Car of the Future, debuting in the 2013 season alongside two new manufacturers, Mercedes-Benz and Nissan, with Volvo joining in 2014. Another new expansion This time, to the United States of America at the Circuit of the Americas was added, and another attempted expansion to the Kuala Lumpur circuit was thrown into the ring, but ultimately did not succeed. 2017 saw Gen 2 introduced, although with less manufacturer support, as Volvo and Mercedes-Benz had already left at this point, with Nissan still remaining committed. Keeping a lot of the same components as the original generation, but with newer updates, the parity and competitiveness remained high. But the goal long term turned back to getting manufacturers to return and create even more closer and competitive racing. So the rules were changed again in 2023 to the now current Gen 3. Gen 3 has two manufacturers, Chevrolet and Ford, and it creates less dirty air and generates less downforce to make the cars more difficult to drive, as well as changing the looks to less sedan-like and more coupe-like. The cars would also keep their parts very similar to ensure parity level, albeit this wasn't the case at the start, as Ford was down on performance compared to Chevrolet, which is the replacement to Holden, although this became less an issue as Ford got an update going into the final two rounds of the season and won both races. 2024 Supercars features 24 cars on the grid and 12 rounds on the season, a slight downgrade on entries compared to the usual 25, but still a huge amount of depth in the field with a lot of new faces on the grid. For the first time since 2019, Supercars goes to New Zealand and with a new track. Taupo is the first track since Pukekohe to be on the New Zealand's schedule, and one that Supercars has never been to previously. Other familiar tracks have stuck around, and some other notable features includes no new Newcastle Street Circuit to start the season, as instead it's replaced with a double 250-kilometer race weekend at Bathurst, and there's no race at the Bend Motorsport Park, which is expected to return as an endurance race for 2025. The biggest storylines regarding drivers includes the replacement of Shane Van Gisbergen, who had run for Triple Eight Engineering in the 97 for 8 seasons. In steps in Will Brown from Erebus Motorsport. Brown had been the points leader at several points during the past season, but ultimately fell down to 5th in points by season's end. Brown is still a more than capable driver, as he has won the Bathurst 12-hour twice overall, the TCR Australia Championship in 2019, and came second in the Super 2 title fight in 2020. Jack LeBrock is now the new driver for Erebus in for Will Brown, as Walkinshaw's former driver Nick Percat now replaces that seat. Super 2 graduate Ryan Wood fills in the seat for Nick Percat. Walkinshaw also sold 2 of its team charters, one to Team Blanchard, and one was returned to Supercars for the season. James Courtney also left the team, going to Blanchard, whilst Declan Frazier, the other Walkinshaw driver, wasn't able to secure a seat for 2024. Aaron Love, one of the Super 2 drivers from 2023, became the second driver for Blanchard. Jackson Evans fills in the seat at Brad Jones Racing, vacating the meme himself, Jack Smith, who retired from full-time racing. David Reynolds left Grove Racing for Team 18, replacing Scott Pye. The new driver for Grove, then, is Richie Stanaway, driving his first full-time Supercar season since 2019. There's a big elephant in the room here. Brody Kostecki and Erebus are no longer together. The champion team and champion driver have had a long-standing issue that has boiled over, as Kostecki has taken a temporary absence, whilst Erebus has found a temporary replacement in Todd Hazelwood. More than likely what's going on is a legal issue, and we still don't know the full details of it to this point. But what can be said is that it probably won't be rectified soon, and might be the end of Kostecki's future Supercars ambitions. Now that we know this, how do you watch the races? If you're outside Australia and New Zealand, it's on SuperView, which is a paid subscription for the Supercar series. For about $65 a year in US dollar amount, you can get every practice, qualifying, and race session live or on replay. A fairly reasonable price given the amount of access Supercars allows you to have with their coverages. Supercars provide some of the most action-packed and thrilling racing on unique circuits, with a focus on thrills and tons of tense racing. 24 drivers climbing up and down the mountain at Bathurst? What's not to love? I hope you all enjoyed this video, and consider liking and subscribing.